Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Literature Channel. I'm Tim Wilson. This is the fourth in a series of lectures on esoteric literature. We talked about in the first one just the general approach. We talked about in the second one, philosophic tradition of Athens and how that led to philosophic esotericism. We talked about biblical traditions of secrecy in the third, and now having talked about, let's say, varieties of esotericism, I want in this lecture to talk about, at a pretty high level, some basics for how to interpret esoteric literature. So let's get started. First of all, we have to know kind of some of the basic techniques that people are going to, as authors, are going to employ when they're writing esoterically. So what are some of the methods? If they want to hide the real meaning, maybe they use silence. Maybe they gloss over and not mention explicitly something that is obvious. So silence, obvious silences are and an example from some of the works we'll be studying in the course, Shakespeare's Henry V is silent on the actual military strategy and was used in the historical Battle of Agincourt. And I think that might point to certain things, as if you look at Henry V might point to certain, let's say, exaggerations with on the religious side. Maybe there are contradictions or errors within obvious contradictions, obvious errors. So again, from Henry V, there's these multiple ways in which the depiction of Henry V as a holy ruler are contradicted by Shakespeare. And then a wide variety of literary devices. So we talked about parables, metaphor, allegory, typology, estate satire. In the latter example, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, dramatic devices, putting truths in different voices, the interplay of the action versus the words. So we can see this in Plato's Republic, but also in More's Utopia. Numerology, there's a real rich tradition here that I can't get into too much in this course for the fact that I know the barest limits of it, but gematria is a Jewish tradition of numerology, and in that tradition, the letters of the divine name um, can be numerically represented by 10, a 5, a 6, and a 5. And interestingly enough, Paradise Lost was written very carefully by Milton in his revised edition to come out to that exact number of lines. And I think an astute scholar that I'm forgetting now, forgetting the name of that scholar, pointed that out, and I think was wise to do so. And then there's the actual structure of the work as a whole. And we can see the structure, whether it's the structure of the work as a whole or parts of the work, the structure of parts of the work, where we can see patterns of chiasmus, and we'll talk about that, or ring compositions, so where we have mirroring of certain components, and this is parallels chiastic structure as well. And often what's happening there is the truth can be hidden in the middle somewhere, the least exposed part. We can have repetition with difference in these types of repeating structures. And the Republic and More's Utopia are, again, good examples of that. And we'll go through, in those works, we'll look at the structure of those works as ring compositions or chiastic compositions, and how More's Utopia is a reversal of the structure, equally chiastic, but reverses the structure that Plato puts together in the Republic. So again, methods for interpreting those esoteric texts. So those are some of the devices that authors are going to employ. How are we going to try to detect these things? So I think first of all, is practicing the art of slow reading, and what Nietzsche calls the art of lento. And I'm just going to refer to a quote here from Nietzsche's Daybreak. It's on the right. We are friends of the Lento, I and my book. I have not been a philologist in vain. Perhaps I am one yet, a teacher of slow reading. I even come to write slowly. At present, it is not only my habit, but even my taste, a perverted taste, maybe, to write nothing but what will drive to despair everyone who is in a hurry. For this very reason, philology is now more desirable than ever. For this reason, it is the highest attraction and incitement in an age of work, that is to say, of haste, of unseemly and immoderate hurry scurry, which is intent upon getting things done at once, even every book, whether old or new. So I think a couple things I want to highlight there is, well, first of all, this emphasis on slow reading, but also how esoteric texts and the traditions of esotericism, I think, are are largely overlooked today because there's so much going on, so much going against them and their points of departure. And we'll talk about a couple of them later in this lecture, but here's one as well. And one of the points going against them is we live in an age of of hurry scurry, as Nietzsche says, and where we want seamless transactions, transparent transactions. Give me the gist. Give, let's boil this down. Let's have this to be a utilitarian exchange of information. This operates against the whole premises of the tradition of esotericism. So the first method is slow reading. I think when thinking about the list of books I'll be able to read in my lifetime, it is a very humble list. I want to prioritize those books. I want to make that list because I know I have a finite time. And I don't want to be spending my time reading works that may not convey the highest wisdom. That's coupled, in addition to my finitude, it's coupled by the fact that to understand these works carefully, I'm going to have to read them extremely slowly. And to the next point, read them multiple times, several times, in each case, probably get a slightly different nuance out of them. And I'm going to have to try to find some good commentaries. That's the third point I make here. And what do I mean by good commentaries? I would say try to find scholars that are, and these are largely traditional scholars who are not trying to bring the most modern or the most current political ism to bear on the work, to deconstruct the work through the lens of post-colonialism or through whatever other ism might be a la mode today. Because what is happening there in my mind is we are bringing a lens of the present in such a way that we are obscuring what that past author is trying to say or the wisdom that could be conveyed. If I want to understand the esoteric meaning of the text itself that the author may have had, I can't be bringing these political biases of the present. I have to try to approach the work on its own terms. Now, a good point a friend raised with me is, okay, well, with if we say that there's all these hidden meanings, as with conspiracy theories today, couldn't we just have a proliferation of a lot of wacky theories that may not have or may not be rooted in evidence, or they may go off in all directions? So I think that's a great point, and I think it's a danger with esoteric reading. I think the danger of going off on strange readings is a danger, even if we stick to just literal interpretations, because that's what happens. We don't get consensus on these interpretations either. However, it's also, it may be more so a danger if people just go trying to find secret meanings without kind of rigor. And part of that rigor is beginning with the literal level. So the interpretation has to begin with the literal level and only point to the existence of concealed levels of meaning if there are cues within the text. So in the last lecture, for instance, I tried to interpret the Odyssey with a medieval fourfold manner of interpretation. Now, that is a way that the Middle Ages would have approached Homer. And however, that the cues for those four levels are not really in the text for Homer itself. So texts written in the Middle Ages themselves would have had the fourfold method in mind. Homer, there's not really cues in the text himself. There's cues for allegorical interpretations for sure, but there's not necessarily cues for anagogical interpretations that there's some sort of united divine truth at the end of one's journey. So even after establishing the existence of multiple levels and getting the cues from the text themselves, the reader needs to stick to what is supported by textual evidence. So this is crucial to giving some sort of rigor to this interpretive method. So we're reading slowly, we're reading multiple times, we're looking at good commentaries, we're sticking to the literal level and using textual evidence, and we're reading closely and in an engaged way. So Arthur Meltzer, I've mentioned Arthur Meltzer's book on reading between the lines, or philosophy between the lines, I believe it's called, a couple times. It's a great book on the esoteric, the philosophic esoteric tradition. And he uses the example of someone reading a letter from a romantic prospect. So in that case, someone's reading the letter, they're engaged, they're invested in the content, and they attend to what is said and what is not said, or contradictions. So some of these methods that we talked about of esoteric communication. So the reader in that case is attending to silences. So the romantic prospect didn't return a phrase of affection. Does that mean they're feeling cold to me or something like that? I think so too, and this is me, I can't speak for Arthur Meltzer in this case. I think so too with the great books. We should try to find ongoing questions or literary genres we're passionate about that will allow us to read with the same type of passionate interests that we saw in that example of reading a letter from a romantic prospect. So that's reading closely, or the course at the University of Ottawa, engaging with literature. So being engaged is reading closely and in being invested and trying to find these hidden meanings. So as I mentioned, our age has forgotten this tradition. And this is to quote Meltzer: wherever it is a matter of esotericism in the sphere of religion, no less than philosophy, and part of my point is we need to think of a broad taxonomy here, and we could add the sphere of literary esotericism more generally here. Our age stands stubbornly in opposition and utterly alone against the rest of history. Why? Well, primarily, I think the first reason is ours is a democratic age. However, the esoteric tradition assumed a hierarchical conception of humanity. So there are those few who are capable of understanding and handling the truth, and then there are the many who are not. And this is another quote from Nietzsche that I think summarizes very, very well and very powerfully, as often only Nietzsche can, this point. Our loftiest insights must and should ring out like foolishness under some circumstances, like crimes, when in some forbidden way they come to the ears of those for whom they are not suitable and who are not predestined to hear them. The exoteric and the esoteric views, as people earlier differentiated them among philosophers, with Indians as with Greeks, Persians, and Muslims. In short, wherever people believed in a hierarchy and not in equality and equal rights, this differentiation does not arise so much from the fact that the exoteric view stands outside and looks, assesses, measures, and judges from the outside, not from the inside. The more essential point is that the exoteric view sees the matter looking up from underneath, but the esoteric sees it looking down from above. This is from Beyond Good and Evil. So another example of a similar point from Montaigne, writing in the early 16th century: Ariosto of Chios had reason to say long ago that philosophers harmed their listeners, inasmuch as most souls are not fit to profit by such instruction. And even earlier, Galen registers a similar thought. My discourse in this book is not for all people. My discourse is for a man among them who is equal to thousands of men, or rather tens of thousands. And Maimonides says in his Guide for the Perplexed, these matters are only for a few solitary individuals of a very special sort, not for the multitude. For this reason, they should be hidden from the beginner, and he should be prevented from taking them up, just as a small baby is prevented from taking coarse foods and from lifting heavy weights. So another reason, so we have this the problem of our democratic outlook that sh- that eschews the notion that there are a few that are reserved for the truth and the many. We also have or live in an age that I would say is permeated with what we could call a radical historicism or relativism. And what that means is that we can't take the point of departure that the tradition of esotericism took. Esotericism assumes that thinkers and prophets can transcend the cave of opinion of their own time, of their own community, and discover certain enduring truths. Ours is an age, as I said, of radical historicism or relativism. Our general assumption is that there is no enduring truth to communicate, and that authors of past ages could not transcend their caves to relay such a truth, even if one existed. However, if we want to properly understand the text of the past, so this is our bias, this is our cave, so to speak. If we want to understand the texts of the past, however, we need to try to take, as much as possible, an approach that the texts themselves were written in. We need to overcome these prejudices of the present, egalitarianism, relativism. And I think it's for this reason, this kind of two prongs that were very important in Strauss's own writing, Leo Strauss's own writing. Leo Strauss, one of the first to bring back to light this notion of philosophic esotericism. Obviously, the other religious traditions of esotericism, literary esotericism, well-trodden ground. But Strauss brought back an awareness of philosophic esotericism. And I think that's why both historicism and esotericism is linked for him. So that problem of how we can, let's say, transcend the cave of our own commitments and our own historical viewpoint, and how we need to be able to see the esoteric tradition as something that can help us transcend that historical sightedness, as well as a reason for refuting the, let's say, enduring truth of the historical thesis. And inspired by another one of my friends, when I talked about esotericism to one of my friends, he pointed out this poem by Emily Dickinson, and I thought it would be a fitting way to close off this series of lectures on esoteric literature. So this is Emily Dickinson. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies, too bright for our infirm delight, the truth's superb surprise, as lightning to the children eased, with explanation kind, the truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. So with that, I'll close. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed these lectures on esoteric literature. Till next time.